Hi there, and thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast, where we make adulting easier by making money easier. This is your host, Lauren, and I'm joined today by Dividend Dave. After 30 years of making all the investing mistakes possible, Dave is finally on a path to financial freedom. He is primarily focused on the dividend investing strategy, but also trying to increase his streams of income through monetization of the Passive Income podcast. Since recently turning 50, he knows there are only a few good years left to get his financial house in order. Thanks for joining me, Dave.
Hey, Lauren. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, you kind of nailed it there. Made a lot of mistakes over the years. Obviously, learned a lot from those mistakes. And like you said, recently turning 50, it's quite the number when you hit it. You're like, holy wow, where did the last 30 years go? And then you realize, oh wow, I've only got like 10 to 15 good years left to actually work and get that get your finances in order so that hopefully you'll have an enjoyable retirement and not worrying about where the next meal comes from, where the next bill payment comes from. Because I know there are a lot of people in that situation in retirement where they're just barely getting by. And of course, the whole point is to not be one of those people.
Absolutely. And I want to dive into some of those mistakes. But first, I do want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you all by House Money Media, Tom Brickman, the Frugal Gay, Alan Corey, Real Estate Maximalist, and me, Lauren Keenaman from Adulting is Easy. I've joined forces to launch a new generation of real estate investors by forming House Money Media. We are creating a membership. So it's Discord and courses, group coachings, and more. Visit housemoneymedia.com to learn more about that. Again, that's housemoneymedia.com. Real estate content with personality. So our goal for today is to make adulting easier for everyone by discussing our personal finance topics, since managing money is a huge part of adulting. So Dave, given that you run the Passive Income podcast, we are going to talk about passive income today. But like I said, I want to know what some of those mistakes are, if it's not too painful for you to talk about them.
Well, no, it's not painful at all. I've talked about them several times when I've been guests on other podcasts as well. So I don't want to rehash it too much because I don't want people just to if they've already heard my full version of the entire story. But there's two main ones that I'm going to touch on. The first one being when I was 19, maybe 20 years old, and so this is going way back to the early 90s, 1992 or 93. Obviously, we didn't have things like the internet, or the internet was in its very infancy. So there was no such thing as apps on our cell phones or social media or online banking or any of that. And all we had really for resources were books and newspapers. And even back then, obviously, well, even by today's standards, newspapers are really yesterday's news, right? So
Mm.
we were in that situation where it's like you literally had to go to the library to look for books, go to a bookstore, look for books on investing or finance or whatever. And I was lucky enough to read a book called The Wealthy Barber. It is a Canadian centric book. However, the methods or the methods in that book are very much, oh, you have it right there. Yeah, Mr. David Chilton, shout out.
So you guys can't see this if you're on audio, but if you're on video, I'm holding up The Wealthy Barber. It is a great book. I wish they would update it because everything is really, like you said, kind of 90s specific. Even I have the third edition and it's like updated as of 1997. So I
Right.
do wish some of like the numbers would be updated, and there's some retirement things in there that are not exactly the same. But anyways, yeah, great book. Sorry to
So
interrupt you.
no problem. You asked me about the mistake. So reading that book was definitely not the mistake. That was like the key to my investing journey. And I remember back then I somehow found a stockbroker to call. So I mean, you're literally looking up in the yellow pages, right? Because again, you're not just Googling it back then. And that conversation did not go well. The stockbroker said to me, it's like, well, you need like $10,000 to start. And I'm like, I'm a 19-year-old kid. I don't have $10,000 just kicking around, right? So I kind of, was discouraged a little bit, but then I eventually found a financial advisor that got me into a mutual fund. And I mean, obviously, you can argue the pros and cons of mutual funds all day long, but at the time, that was really one of the best vehicles. So I was able to start with $100 to open the account, and then after that, I started putting in $75 a month, and I did that religiously for at least 5 years, maybe six. So now I'm, around 24, 25, graduated college, into that adulting part where I will counter that adulting is not easy all the time. And life throws you some curveballs. And so I had that mutual fund built up to, well, maybe at that time around that 10 grand that I didn't have when I was 19, right? So I was feeling pretty good about myself. But like I said, life throws you some curveballs, and suddenly it was like, oh, I can take 2 grand out of that. Oh, I can take a grand out of that. Oh, I can take another 2 or 3 grand out of that. And then suddenly at 25, I'm right back down to zero. And so that was
Oh,
obviously a huge mistake, because now another 25 years later, could you imagine if I kept putting 75,
right.
100, $150 a month into that? I'd have a serious nest egg in that mutual fund or whatever over those 25 past years. If that mutual fund could have changed into any other investing vehicle. But so that's one of the biggest mistakes that I made in investing, was just, you know, um, depleting that entire account at a relatively young age in my mid 20s. So I'm still kicking myself for that one to this day, obviously. Um,
Yeah, it started off so good. Read The Wealthy Barber, your dollar cost averaging into mutual funds. And mutual funds, they can be expensive in terms of like front end fees, back end fees,
right.
transaction fees, taxes. They can be somewhat inefficient. But in terms of, you're basically buying, probably like a bunch of different stocks, whether that's
Yeah,
some sort of industry or broad market or what have you. So generally that was, like you said, kind of the best way to go at the time. So it started off
definitely.
good, and then you're like, you almost got cocky. You're like, I got this.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, right? Yeah, so I guess then fast forward into, several years later, and obviously I had ups and downs, but I don't want to rehash too much of that, because I have went through it several times on other podcasts, so I don't want to bore people if they've already heard me say this once or twice before. But then the second mistake is marrying the wrong person. Luckily for you, it sounds like you've married the right person. You guys are doing great and you're happy, but I married the wrong person. And every time, so again, people know I'm Canadian, and because I've had so many American guests on my show, I'm familiar with terms like 401k and Roth IRA. But obviously, here in Canada, we have a few different terms, and you're probably familiar with them from Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it. And
Yes, I know. I do. I have some Canadian friends, and I have to admit, I do call them the Maple Roth and the Maple 401k.
yeah, well,
I'm
that's pretty good terms for them, right? Actually,
sorry.
so the TFSA, tax-free savings account, and RRSP, registered retirement savings plan. So yeah, those are your maple funds basically. The TFSA, I've kind of argued that it should be called the tax-free investment account, um, but that's just my opinion, I guess. So going back to marrying the wrong person, every time I had some money in either of those accounts, she was always like, oh, well, let's buy this or let's buy that. And I would be like, no. And she'd be like, well, let's do it. You have money saved up. And I'm like, no, but that's money for like later on in life. And she didn't really understand that concept. Or so, yeah, basically every time I seemed to cave, and it was like, well, there goes another $2,000 on another horse that we don't need to own, because horses are expensive also,
Oh yeah, well.
and or a
So the
horse trailer.
do you correct me if I'm wrong, your 401k type, you don't have the 10% penalty to take it out early. Is that right? Like we do before 59 and a half?
I I think so. On the RSP, I'm pretty sure you just have to pay the taxes on it when
Right.
you
Okay.
withdraw
That's what I've
early,
heard.
and
Yeah.
then the tax-free savings account is just tax-free. So
Right. Okay. So the tax free is like the Roth. The RRSP is like the 401k. See, that is a difference here that maybe would keep some people from doing that, is you have to take a 10% penalty and pay the taxes if you're younger than 59 and a half, if you were to do that out of your 401k. But in Canada, as far as I know, you guys don't have that 10%. So you don't have that extra kind of barrier there.
right, which would have helped.
I don't know. It sounds like she might have really wanted that horse no matter what the penalty was.
Well, yeah, and so that's definitely we see it all the time on Twitter, X, and people talk about don't marry the wrong person. And so that's definitely another mistake I made. And that's not just a financial mistake, that's a life mistake. So,
Mm.
but you
Yeah, I
live and
think
learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, we see that on Twitter, and people do really focus on it being a financial mistake, but that's kind of like I would think, water under the bridge, like a small part of it at the end of the day.
I would say a big part of it, but it's still not the entire part of it, right? Because obviously there's more to a marriage than just finances, but finances are one of the leading causes of divorce in why
Oh
marriages
yeah,
fail.
of course, of course. How do you not marry the wrong person?
If I knew that, I would write a book and be like a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's I do think that, if married the right person, absolutely. We though very early on, I mean, like, well, too early, second date probably. I was like asking, like, do you have an emergency fund? And I found out really early on that he put his down payment for his car on a credit card,
Oh,
and he had
ouch.
financed a TV, which was 125. It was 0%. It was $125 a month for like 5 years or something. So I found this stuff out really early on, and he was really quick to make changes. Now the credit card was 0% interest for a certain amount of time, and he did pay that down before the interest kicked in. He was making double payment. He started making double payments on his car, got an emergency fund, was able to sell the TV to somebody for what he had left on it, and so he was really quick to make some of those changes, which kind of allowed me to know, like, okay, we can be on the same page financially. But that's all I've got on that side of things.
So you got him straightened out right away. Like by the third
I
date, you were
did.
like, "Listen, this is what we're doing with you."
I did. I did. Well, he was really open to doing it. And we were talking about this before we started recording. He's 3 years younger than me. And so we're talking, like, I was 25, he was 22. There's a pretty big difference between 25 and 22. He was like a couple of months out of graduating college. Whereas I was in my sales career. I had a house. I had just bought myself, my second car and paid cash for it. So there were just differences. But yes, I educated him, but I've got to give him a ton of credit for being open to coaching and feedback and learning.
Definitely. Yeah,
All
and
right.
that's
So
where I was sorry to interrupt. That's just where
no,
she wasn't like, and even, by the beginning of our marriage, I had discovered the dividend investing strategy. And I tried to explain to her, like, listen, you buy companies, they pay you a dividend, you take that dividend, you buy more shares, then they pay you more. And it's just, you just keep accumulating more. And all she could ever see was like that first, say 10 cent or 50 cent dividend payment. And she couldn't really see the long-term vision of that snowball effect. So that was another, uh, you know, obstacle to me getting restarted again for the third, fourth, fifth time.
then transitioning to dividends, you need to own the stock to get the dividend. Is that
Correct.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you buy a stock. The stock is a little piece of ownership of a company,
Correct.
and when they make money, when they generate cash, they can either reinvest it back in their business or pay it out to their shareholders.
Right.
Some stocks pay dividends, some stocks don't. Some stocks dividends are growing, some stocks dividends are not. But why do you
Some cut
like
their dividend, which is
right?
painful.
Yes, but some have dividends that are too high. I learned this. That's not
Yep.
good. Too high is also there's like a Goldilocks dividend amount that you should be getting. But so say more about the dividend investing strategy and why that appeals to you so much.
Yeah. So basically, obviously, it's a form of passive income, and to me, I feel it's the truest or most passive form of passive income because, like you said, you just buy the stock, and you can buy it once, or you can dollar cost average, and you can say buy one share at a time every 2 weeks when you get a paycheck, or you can buy 10 shares, or if you have a whole bunch saved up and you have a lump sum, you can buy 100 shares, or whatever your financial situation is, buy 1,000 shares, whatever. And then obviously the dividend is paid per share. And like I said, the actual, dividend payment is kind of relatively small. Like, well, yes and no. As you pointed out, some of those high yields can be attractive but risky because of that potential for a dividend cut. So we'll just use the term or the number 5%. That's kind of the easy one. And that's so 5% is generally seen as a pretty good dividend yield. And that's obviously an annualized number. And so some companies can pay out that 5% quarterly or monthly. And so at the end of the day, 5% is 5% annually. But There is something nice about a monthly dividend payment. It's just psychology and mentally seeing that money show up in your brokerage account once a month. And so, yeah, like I said, 5% on say a $100 stock is not a lot. If you're paying $100 for the stock and you're getting, you know, at 5% annually is $5, correct? So then quarterly you're getting $1.25 per share, which is pretty good. But you're like, okay, but to make that $1.25 into 10.25, I now need 10 of those shares. And that means if it's a $100 stock, I'm now investing $1,000 into that company. So it's good because now you have $1,000 invested in the market. Every quarter you're getting your $10 and change. And of course, then there's still opportunity for that stock to have capital appreciation, for that stock to go up in share value.
That's what
And
I was
so
going to
that's kind
say.
of the
You still own the stock. So you're
right.
getting this on top of owning the stock. So if it's appreciating, you're getting all of that as well. When you get the dividends, do you keep the cash or are you buying more stocks with the dividends?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that really depends on where someone is in their investing journey. At the beginning, the majority of people should be reinvesting. Um, reinvesting that. Let's just say that $10. And again, now we have the opportunity for fractional shares. So again, you're getting $10, and the stock is $100. Now you can buy 1/10 of another share, right? So, and then the next month, your dividend, or the next quarter, your dividend payment is going to go up by that 1/10, and you can keep that rolling over and over and over. And you can do that automatically with what's called DRIP, dividend reinvestment plan. However, personally, I manually reinvest. I don't have any automatic reinvestments, and that's simply because I like to take dividends from one company and dollar cost average down on another company. So as we know, in the stock market, share prices fluctuate up and down, and so if I can dollar cost average down on a share on a company that I like, I will tend to take dividends from another company and put it into that company that I can DCA down on.
How many individual stocks do you own?
Total with, I think there's 2 ETFs in there, and I'm around 24 or 25.
Okay. So you sort of built your own little index in a way.
Right. And yeah, and
If
it's
you think
fairly
if you think of the
diversified.
Dow, like the Dow is 30 stocks, right? So
Right.
if you're holding like say 22 plus those 2 indexes, that's kind of close.
Yeah. And I do feel it's fairly diversified. I have obviously a Canadian bank, 2 Canadian banks, because I literally bought 1 share of TD. So that's not much, but and then I hold Bank of Nova Scotia. I hold Bell Canada, which is the largest telecom, and well, it's a media company now. It started out obviously 100 and some years ago as a landline telephone company, but 100 plus years later, it's obviously has several divisions. I have a lot of REITs. All the REITs in Canada pay out monthly. I have some energy stocks. I have some food stocks like consumer staples, consumer discretionary. So, yeah, I'm fairly diversified.
Why not buy stocks that just go up in value and then sell those as you need them in retirement?
Yeah, so that's obviously quite the conversation on Twitter and in the DivTwit and FinTwit community. And I love reading those tweet threads back and forth between some of the growth investors and the dividend investors. They're very entertaining. I, for the most part, try to not comment and just stay out of them.
Yeah, I'm
And
more in real estate twit than div twit, but I see those sometimes. Man, they are
they're
it reminds me
entertaining.
of that. Do you remember that Dr. Seuss book? It was like the bitter butter battles, and it was like one team was fighting for buttering the top side of your toast, the other team was fighting for buttering the bottom side of your toast, and they were like
Right.
fighting about it. Just reminds me of that. Like we're still talking about
Nice.
stocks and wealth and retirement and but anyways, so yeah, because I mean it's like
So
real estate. You can buy properties that are appreciating. Maybe you're doing a little better than break even for 30 years, but you're paying down the loan and it's appreciating in value. Or you can get these cash flowing properties that aren't appreciating. So that's kind of the example that I see as it relates to individual stocks.
right. And so in those tweet threads that I was referring to, the back and forth, both sides make some Excellent points, right? Because as you said off the top, if a company isn't paying their shareholders, then they can take that cash flow and do something else with, pay down debt, invest in R&D, and obviously a plethora of other things. And so, yeah, then the share price should appreciate if you're paying down debt, investing in R&D, and whatever else you're doing to build your business. So I definitely see the argument for the growth strategy. But at the end of the day, also, as you also just mentioned a few minutes ago, with the dividend strategy, you still own the stocks after they pay you the dividend. So that's kind of the back and forth there is okay. And like I also said, dividend stocks also have the potential for capital appreciation, right? So there's a lot to it. I don't know the correct answer. I don't claim to be a financial guru or expert or anything like that. I just love talking to people about it and getting everyone's thoughts and opinions, whether it's on Twitter or through all the guests I've had, like yourself, on the Passive Income podcast, where we just talk and have great conversations, and you get a lot of eye-opening thoughts where it's like, oh, I haven't thought of that before, right? And I get a lot of comments either in the YouTube comments or on Twitter that people say, oh, I watched this episode with this guest and they made me think about this, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome that it just opened somebody's eyes to think about something in a different light.
Yep, that's why we do it. So how much, if we learn that you're 50, you want to retire at some point, how much are you going to need to retire? And how, like, are you trying to get the dividends to exactly equal your living expenses, or what does that plan look like for you?
Yeah, so that's a big part of it. You see people who are at that stage where it's like, hey, all my dividends could cover my monthly expenses, my cell phone bill, my electricity, internet, rent or mortgage, whatever you're paying, your insurance, your gas, your groceries, all of the monthly bills that tend to add up to quite a bit these days, right? So, how much is enough is a crazy question that obviously is a personal question for everyone. Personally, I don't think I need $1 million in my brokerage account paying me 100 grand a year in dividends or whatever it is. Obviously, that would be nice. I do have that on my Twitter profile just because I put it there basically. If I get to that point, great. If I don't, it's not the end of the world.
Well,
And
those
so
are good
basically,
round numbers that you can
right.
understand. But if we're sticking with the 5%, if that's a normal dividend yield, then at $1 million, you would get
Right.
$50,000 per
Yeah.
year. And then you'd have the stocks too. So I guess you could sell those here and there for other things that you need.
Yeah. So, I'm sure I could live in retirement on $50,000. We also have things here in Canada. I believe in the US, you call it Social Security for when you're into retirement. And those are just basically what the government gives you. So here we have two things called CPP, Canada Pension Plan, and OAS, Old Age Security. And they don't add up to a lot. Like, going back to what I was saying too about people in retirement that are struggling, they're trying to live off of just those two things. And unfortunately, it's not enough to make ends meet. So you really need to have more, whether it's invested or whatever it is, you need to have more and not just rely on those two things. Those two things really should kind of be your bonus at the end of the day in retirement.
I agree.
However, however, if it gets to the point where it's like, okay, those two things plus my dividends could pay for my retirement, I don't need to live a lavish luxury lifestyle in retirement. Sure, trips to Italy or Japan or Australia would be nice. But if that doesn't happen, that doesn't happen. I traveled a lot when I was younger as well. So I feel like I got a lot of the travel bug out of my system in my 20s. So
That's not a bad way to do it. I was reading recently Die with Zero, and he kind of says like 20s and 30s kind of the best time to travel because you're
right.
still like in pretty decent shape and things like that.
You have a lot more energy when you're 25 than you do when you're 50. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. So we talked about what your goals are, approximately $1 million in your brokerage account of dividend paying stocks. So when do you think that goals, they say, right, they should be smart? And one of those is time oriented.
Right.
When is your retirement goal?
I'd by 60 or before, so 10 years.
Okay, nice.
And yeah, that's the timeline that I've kind of set for myself. Sooner would be better, obviously. Um, if I could get to it by 55, 57, that's better. You can't access the CPP and OAS until I think the CPP you can access early at 60, but then you would obviously get less per month than if you access it at 65. And honestly, I'm not even sure if you can access the OAS early or not. So yeah, to retire even at 57, you need to have some, you need to have enough to survive, obviously. And yeah, so that's what I'm looking at. And another big thing over these next 5 to 7 years is really where does the passive income podcast take me, right? Like, we see on YouTube some of these young kids with millions of subscribers that are really making a lot of money. Obviously, Mr. Beast is the prime example of somebody who's making a ridiculous amount of money just from YouTube, but he's the outlier. Not everyone is like him. And I'm not looking for, millions of subscribers. I'm just looking for, enough subscribers and enough monetization to supplement my income and to, increase the streams, the streams of revenue.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, 4 years into adulting is easy, and it makes enough money for me to go to FinCon and Podfest and pays for itself.
Nice.
Woohoo. But we'll see. We'll see where House Money Media takes me. So I have some goals with that. But certainly the majority of my goals, definitely my financial goals are related to the real estate. I mean, some with the 401k and Roth IRA and Social Security, I guess. Our Social Security starts at 67 for most people. People that are much older, it's a little lower than that.
Right.
We don't get health insurance till we're 65. And then we get Social Security starting at 67, and then it maxes out at 70, I think, unless they changed it. So we've got to work, we've got more of a gap then. But
Right.
we can touch our 401k and stuff at 59 and a half without any penalties.
So there's actually a great point to bring up is I don't have to worry about healthcare coverage. I haven't had to worry about that since the day I was born. So
Rub it in. Rub it in. Oh, I wanted to ask, a lot of times I have guests on that are, in their 20s, in their 30s. And I think your story is great because what I've talked about before on here is 10 or 15 years of really, really buckling down can change your financial life and
right.
really take you from in a hole to retirement. And it sort of doesn't matter when that starts. When did you really get serious about investing in financial freedom?
Well, like I said, barring all the mistakes, I've been trying to do it my whole life, but I just keep making all those mistakes over and over again. So, to those people in their 20s and early 30s, just don't make the mistakes, right? Learn from us, learn from all of us older that have made all the mistakes. Don't make the mistakes we've made. I talked about this too on another podcast where I said today's culture too is a lot different. Like, there's a side hustle culture, and you can, click apps on your phone. And you can go and do Uber Eats or DoorDash or whatever you call it in your area. And maybe you can make an extra 100 or 200 bucks. And then all of a sudden you're not dipping into your savings or your investing brokerage account. So definitely culture has changed. There's definitely more opportunities um, to avoid making the mistake I made back in, I guess, the late 90s, early 2000s when that mutual fund got depleted.
There's a quote, it's becoming my favorite quote by John C. Maxwell, and it said that a wise person learns from his mistakes. A wiser one learns from others' mistakes, but the wisest person of all learns from others' successes.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that tweet the other day, and learning from other people's successes obviously is huge. And I think also just celebrating other people's successes, like not being jealous of someone because they've had success, but being happy for them. Like I'm cheering for everyone. I want everyone to win.
It's because someone else wins doesn't mean you lose. It's not a basketball game, you know?
Right.
So is there anything else you'd like to add, Dave, before we wrap up?
Yeah. So in wrapping up, basically, obviously just get started. I refer to it as my Moneyball reference, the movie with Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. Just get on base. Just get on base. Just get started. So whether you're 25, 35, 45, just get started and then stay consistent. Keep dollar cost averaging in, whether whatever it is that is your vehicle, whether it's the dividend investing strategy, the total growth strategy, the real estate strategy like yourself, or whatever it takes to better yourself. There was another point that I did want to bring up too. I was looking for the articles earlier this morning, and all I could find was articles talking about how much you should have saved by, say, ages 45, 50, 55, etc. But I was looking for the articles that say the average of how much Canadians actually do have saved. And I'm sure the numbers are similar in the US, where people in that age group, myself included, we don't have enough saved for retirement or invested. And, in the DivTwit community and the FinTwit community, we're the smaller percentage of the population. We're the outliers where people talk about money, where everyone's striving to fire financial independence, retire early. But the majority of the population, and I know it is in Canada, and I'm sure probably in the US and many other countries around the world, where people in the age groups that I mentioned, 45, 50, 55 above, simply don't have enough. Simply don't have enough. I'm just going to end it at simply don't have enough. And you don't want to be one of those people. So,
There's
just
two
get started, get on base.
there's two sides to that. One is, so don't feel bad if you don't have enough, because it's easy to be on Twitter and think you're behind when you're really not.
Yeah.
And yeah, you basically have to start young to have enough when you're, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now.
Right.
So why don't you tell people how to learn more about you and get in touch with you?
Yeah. So you can find me on YouTube at the Passive Income Podcast. Please head over there and subscribe. I would love to have more subscribers, more engagement on YouTube, more viewers, obviously. And then, yeah, on Twitter, you can see my handle there at Lovey1973. And that obviously refers to my birth year, 73, 50 years later. Where
You
does the time
guys,
go?
I hear you. So I am on YouTube as well, and this video is there at Adulting is Easy, on Twitter at Adulting is Easy, Instagram at Adulting is Easy Real. If you liked this episode, you'll also like episode 115 with Dream Dividend, or episode 64 with Dividend Hero. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Hopefully, Dave and I have made adulting a little easier for you.